quiet residential neighborhood in Charlotte County, Florida. A Sunday evening, like hundreds of others. Neighbors are having dinner, watching television, preparing for the start of a new week. No one suspects that something has happened in one of the houses that could soon shake even the most experienced investigators. At 6 p.m., a call is received by the emergency center. A young voice sounds calm, without a hint of panic. He reports that there has been an accident. The dispatcher's questions evoke no emotion in him. He answers briefly and clearly, as if he were repeating a text already learned. When the police arrive at the scene of the incident, they are greeted by a young man. He is calm, his hands in his pockets, his gaze distant. Inside the house, an eerie scene presents itself. Soon, investigators begin to reconstruct the events of that day, looking for inconsistencies in the young man's story and investigating the family's past. They do not suspect that in investigating the case, they will be confronted with a story that began long before this evening, and that the past has already claimed a victim no one asks about anymore. At first glance, the Griffith family was no different from ordinary American middle-class families. They lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a city known for its quiet atmosphere and traditional family values. However, behind the facade of prosperity lay a real drama that would lead to tragic events in the future. Charles Griffith was born on September 12, 1980, in Tulsa. He grew up in an affluent family where strict discipline was particularly observed. His father was in the military, and his mother was an elementary school teacher. From childhood, Charles was taught to strictly adhere to the rules, to be steadfast in his decisions, and not to show feelings. This upbringing was later reflected in his own attitude toward family life. Catherine was born in mid-May 1982 in Jacksonville, Florida. Unlike Charles, she grew up in a friendly, caring family. Her parents, the elderly couple Robert and Linda Moore, had lived their entire lives in the same house in Charlotte County, Florida. Since childhood, Catherine dreamed of becoming a teacher. She loved children and believed in a friendly approach to people. They met in 1999 at the University of Oklahoma. Catherine came from Florida to Oklahoma to study at the Faculty of Educational Sciences. Charles was a student at the business school at that time. He quickly caught her attention. He was self-confident, ambitious, and wonderfully able to court her. In 2001, after 2 years of relationship, they got married. Catherine was 19 and Charles was 21 years old. Shortly after the wedding, she had her first child, Christopher Griffith, on June 1, 2002. The young couple tried to build a new life, but even then, Charles showed signs of despotism. He controlled the finances and demanded unconditional obedience. The birth of their second son, Colin Griffith, on October 14, 2006, was another milestone in their lives. Catherine hoped that this would strengthen the family, but Charles, on the contrary, became even harsher. He viewed his sons as an extension of himself and strove to raise them in a spirit of strict obedience. This was especially true for Colin, who showed cold-bloodedness and a lack of affection from earliest childhood. The first alarm bells rang when Colin was 5 years old. He exhibited unusual behavior, rarely expressed emotions, did not react to punishments, and could stare at someone for a long time without blinking. His father considered this a sign of strength, but Catherine began to notice something frightening about him. In 2020, after almost 19 years of marriage, Catherine could no longer endure her husband's tyranny and officially filed for divorce on August 17, 2020. Charles was awarded sole custody of Colin because the court believed that he was financially stable and able to provide the child with a better future. Since Catherine did not have a well-paying job, she could not convince the judge of her suitability as the custodial mother. Catherine traveled back to Charlotte County, Florida, where she settled near her parents. However, even after the divorce, she did not stop trying to get Colin back. She repeatedly filed lawsuits and tried to get the case reviewed. But Charles always found a way to block her attempts. Meanwhile, Colin, living with his father, withdrew more and more into himself. This warm, empathetic, and authoritative. This warmth prevents the narrative from sounding cold or sterile. Instead, it provides a sense of reassuring guidance, making the listener trust the storyteller. It should feel like a seasoned journalist or investigator guiding you through complex and unsettling events, maintaining a calm, steady presence that underscores the seriousness and impact of the crime without resorting to melodrama. The speed of the voice should remain the same. At school, he communicated with practically no one, immersed himself in video games, showing no interest in the world around him. At home, he experienced examples of brutal discipline, and any hint of weakness was punished with harsh penalties. Catherine occasionally received messages from him, but there was no warmth or desire for communication. In 2023, 3 years after the divorce, however, she received a message that changed everything. Charles Griffith was found dead, and Colin was arrested on suspicion of murder. This day marked the beginning of a series of events that would shake Charlotte County and lead to a major public outcry. On February 14, 2023, the Central Office received an emergency call from a young man who said he had shot his father. Colin Griffith spoke in a calm voice and claimed he had acted in self-defense. When asked by the emergency center if medical help was needed, he only answered briefly that his father was dead. The police officers arriving at the crime scene found 16-year-old Colin sitting on the couch in the house. The body of Charles Griffith lay on the floor and had 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest and one to the head. The weapon lay nearby. The fingerprints on it belonged solely to Colin. Life with his father after his parents' divorce was not easy. After the court granted Charles sole custody of his son, he had brought his life completely under control. Any disobedience was interpreted as a challenge and immediately punished. Colin grew up in an environment of brutal discipline, where any expression of feeling was viewed as weakness. He was forbidden to communicate with his mother, to leave the house without permission, and every attempt not to obey ended with threats and the withdrawal of customary amenities. The conflicts between the two became more frequent. Tensions reached a turning point when Colin confessed his orientation to his father. Charles took this as a personal insult, whereupon their relationship finally transitioned into a phase of constant arguments. Colin felt trapped and saw no way out anymore. On that day, according to Colin, his father came home in an agitated state. An argument ensued between the two, which escalated into a physical confrontation. The young man claimed that Charles had threatened him with a knife, whereupon, fearing for his life, he grabbed his father's pistol, which was kept in the house, and fired 2 shots. The initial results of the investigation have, however, already raised doubts among the investigators. Charles had been shot twice, once in the chest and once in the head. This suggests that he was likely still alive after the first wound, but was unable to defend himself, and that the second shot was a coup de grace. Colin appeared neither scared nor remorseful. His behavior surprised even experienced investigators. He neither asked for help nor showed fear or panic. When asked for details, he calmly repeated the same version without changing his tone. He did not try to apologize or show fear of possible consequences. Catherine Griffith received the news of her ex-husband's death late in the evening of February 14th when she received a call from the police. Initially, she thought it was a mistake. When she learned that her son was in custody for Charles's murder, she couldn't believe what had happened. Her initial reaction was a mixture of shock and alarm, but relief soon set in. Charles could no longer threaten her, could no longer control Colin, could no longer prevent them from getting back together. This moment of joy, however, was overshadowed by the realization that her son had become a criminal. The investigators were unsure whether the young man's words corresponded to the truth. The opposite could not be proven. The only witness to the incident was Colin himself, and there was no clear evidence of a premeditated crime. The weapon belonged to Charles. There were no signs of a struggle in the house, and Colin himself had no visible injuries. The prosecutor's office accepted the version of self-defense, and a few weeks later, the case was closed. Colin was acquitted. No one suspected that this day was only the beginning of a series of events that would soon lead to an even more terrible tragedy. At the end of March 2023, just over a month after his father's death, Colin Griffith arrived in Florida, in Charlotte County, where his mother, Catherine, lived. Now that full custody had been transferred to her, she hoped to start a new life with her son and create a safe and stable environment for him. The first few months went surprisingly smoothly. Colin began attending a local school, enrolled at the community college, and Catherine did her best to create the appearance of a normal family life. She frequently posted photos with her son on social media, trips to the beach, dinners together, vacations. In the comments, her friends supported her and were happy that she was finally close to her son again. No one suspected that behind these pictures lay a completely different, frightening world. Colin behaved distantly, showed no particular affection for his mother. He rarely spoke to her, showed no gratitude for her care, and preferred to spend most of his time playing video games. He was not interested in his school, and Catherine's attempts to involve him in household chores led to irritation. Initially, she put it down to stress after the events he had experienced, but it soon became clear that the problem lay deeper. After a couple of months, the first warning signs appeared. Colin suddenly snapped when things didn't go the way he wanted. He wouldn't leave his room, wouldn't respond to his mother's requests, and showed a terrifying indifference in moments of argument. His face remained expressionless, even when Catherine tried to reach him with tears and pleas. In the fall of 2023, the conflict reached its first peak. Catherine tried to limit the time Colin spent playing video games and demanded that he help with household chores and take care of his college. He then became angry, snatched the controller, and threw it against the wall. Then he left the house without a word and did not return for several hours. When he came back, he acted as if nothing had happened. The situation worsened more and more. In November 2023, another serious incident occurred. Catherine tried once again to get her son to do his chores around the house, but Colin suddenly attacked her. He pushed his mother to the floor, grabbed her by the hair, and pressed her to the ground, uttering threats. Colin's grandmother, who was in the house at the time, witnessed the incident. She immediately called the police. When the officers arrived, Colin tried to justify himself, claiming that his mother had attacked him first. His grandmother's statement, however, completely refuted his version of the story. As a result, Colin was arrested for domestic violence. After his arrest, he was sent for a psychiatric evaluation. The doctors found signs of deep-seated behavioral disorders, including a lack of empathy, an inability to feel remorse, and increased aggressiveness. Despite the recommendation of specialists that he needed long-term therapy, Colin was released after a few months and moved back in with his mother. Catherine began to be seriously afraid of her own son. She shared her fears with friends but did not know what to do. On the one hand, he was her child, whom she loved. On the other hand, she felt that he posed a threat to her. At that time, however, she could not yet imagine that this fear would soon become reality. After Colin's admission to the psychiatric hospital, his behavior did not change. He still showed aggression and remained cold toward his mother, but now openly threatened her. When the doctors released him home, they noted that the young man was reluctant to return to Catherine. He explained that if he was forced to live with her, he would either kill himself or her. These statements were included in the official report, but no further action was taken. The police, for their part, were aware of his problems. When he ran away to his grandmother again in February 2024, officers took him into custody and wrote a report in which he repeated the same threat. If he were sent back to his mother, he would kill her. The law enforcement officers noted this, but merely handed him over to social services, and he was back at Catherine's house. At this point, Catherine had already realized that her son was a threat. In conversations with friends, she admitted that she was afraid of him, that he constantly threatened her, and that he was acting increasingly strangely. She repeatedly said that she doubted the self-defense version that Colin had given after his father's death. She reviewed the details of that tragedy and began to realize that he might not have killed Charles because he feared for his life, but because he wanted to get rid of him. Despite her fear, Catherine tried to smooth things over. She hoped that kindness could change her son's behavior. In the spring of 2024, she began buying him expensive gifts, including new devices and clothes, and gave him money for entertainment. In May, when he graduated from school, she gave him a car. She thought that in this way she could win his favor and show that he was important to her. On social media, she posted photos with signed congratulations, expressing joy over her son's achievements. People observing their lives from the outside thought that everything would turn out for the best. In the pictures, they looked like a happy family. They went on vacation, spent time together. But behind these images was a tension that grew ever greater. Catherine tried to tell herself that she was doing her best, but her intuition told her that she was living with a man who could cross the line one day. Soon after, that is exactly what happened. A few days before the tragedy, the relationship between Colin and Catherine heated up again. On September 6, 2024, an argument broke out between the two. Colin again refused to do the housework, and Catherine demanded that he stop ignoring her requests. He didn't like it when someone tried to control him and reacted aggressively. In the middle of the argument, he packed his things and left the house to drive to his grandmother. It was not the first time Colin had run away there, and his grandmother was horrified by his appearance. She knew what he was capable of and was afraid that her intervention in the situation could backfire. When Catherine found out where her son was, she decided that she could no longer let him do what he wanted. On the morning of September 8th, she called her son and told him that she would have to report him to the police and Child Protective Services if he did not come home. Colin ignored her words. In the afternoon, Catherine drove to her mother's house to pick up her son personally. It was about 4 p.m. According to neighbors' testimonies, an argument broke out between the two right in the yard. Several people heard the screams, but only one neighbor witnessed what happened. She saw Colin roughly grab his mother by the hair and drag her into the house. Catherine resisted and begged him to let her go, but he did not respond. The door slammed shut and nothing more could be heard outside. None of the neighbors called the police. The neighbor who saw him violently drag his mother into the house did not dare to intervene. She went into her room, determined to have nothing to do with it. She later admitted that she feared for her safety. 2 hours passed before the emergency call came in. Colin informed the dispatcher that his mother was dead. He spoke in a calm voice and claimed that Catherine had grabbed a knife during an argument and threatened him. At some point, she had stumbled and fallen, ramming the blade into her neck. Colin emphasized that he had tried to help her, but it was too late. When the police arrived at the scene, Colin was already waiting for them outside. His behavior did not fit the situation. He seemed neither agitated nor scared. This warmth prevents the narrative from sounding cold or sterile. Instead, it provides a sense of reassuring guidance, making the listener trust the storyteller. It should feel like a seasoned journalist or investigator guiding you through complex and unsettling events, maintaining a calm, steady presence that underscores the seriousness and impact of the crime without resorting to melodrama. The speed of the voice should remain the same. The first thing he said to the officers was, "I know my rights. I need a lawyer." He neither tried to explain what had happened nor ask for help for his mother. Inside the house, they found Catherine's body. The picture Colin described was not imaginable in reality. The knife had penetrated too deeply, and the wounds did not match his version. It was clear to the investigators that this was not an accident, but a premeditated crime. After the discovery of Catherine Griffith's body, the investigation team began examining the crime scene. The forensic examiners recorded in detail the position of the objects in the house, the nature of the blood traces, and possible evidence that could confirm or refute Colin's version of the accident. The first thing that struck the forensic team was the complete absence of signs of a struggle. If the version was correct and his mother had really stumbled and fallen on the knife, there should have been signs of chaotic movements at the scene. Scratches on the floor, overturned objects, bloodstains in various places. But none of this was found. Catherine's body was lying flat, the blood was not splashed, and the knife itself had penetrated too deeply, making the version of an accidental fall almost impossible. The pathologist who arrived at the crime scene examined the body and immediately noted several important points. The depth of the blade's penetration indicated significant force. The angle of the wound ruled out the possibility that Catherine could have accidentally fallen on the knife herself. The experts also noticed that the woman had no defensive cuts on her hands, which are typical of attempts to fend off an attack. This meant that she either had no time to recognize the danger or was incapacitated at the time of the blow. The investigators decided to check whether Colin's statement and his emergency call matched. They listened carefully to the recording and noticed an important detail. When the dispatcher asked if the mother needed medical assistance, he did not try to find out if anything could be done to save her. He simply stated that she was dead. Such cold-bloodedness seems suspicious. Next, the investigators examined the traces in the house. It was important to check whether Catherine really held a knife in her hand, as Colin claimed. They analyzed the fingerprints. There were no traces of her fingers on the handle of the knife, only Colin's prints. This immediately refuted his version that his mother had grabbed the weapon first. Another important aspect was the absence of blood traces in the kitchen, from which Catherine allegedly took the knife, according to Colin. The experts carefully examined the work surfaces, the floor, and the kitchen surfaces. Nothing. If she really was carrying the knife with her and accidentally fell on it, there should have been drops of blood where she moved. One of the investigators compared the details of the current crime with the earlier murder of Charles Griffith. He called up the case files from 2023 and saw a striking similarity. In both cases, Colin immediately called the police, gave dry and smooth explanations, showed no emotions, and immediately demanded a lawyer. Two different crimes, but the same pattern of behavior. The investigators decided to examine Colin's psyche more closely, as his behavior raised serious questions. At their request, they examined his conversations with psychiatrists during his previous hospital stay. It turned out that he had already threatened his mother a year before the crime, explicitly telling the doctors that he would either kill her or end his own life. These words were now de facto a prediction of the act. Furthermore, the investigators examined witness statements. A neighbor saw Colin violently drag his mother into the house. Another heard screams but did not call the police. The eyewitness statements directly refuted Colin's version of the events as an accident. The examination of Colin's cell phone was also an important piece of evidence. Forensic technicians found deleted messages and a series of search queries. In the week leading up to the act, he had searched for information on how to kill someone fastest, how long it takes to bleed to death, and read articles about legal loopholes when accused of a crime. These search queries became a powerful argument for the prosecution, proving that the crime against Catherine was planned. This warmth prevents the narrative from sounding cold or sterile. Instead, it provides a sense of reassuring guidance, making the listener trust the storyteller. It should feel like a seasoned journalist or investigator guiding you through complex and unsettling events, maintaining a calm, steady presence that underscores the seriousness and impact of the crime without resorting to melodrama. The speed of the voice should remain the same. The investigators also found out that Catherine had told friends 2 days before the tragedy that she feared for her life. She stated that her son would be to blame if something happened to her. This confession was a last warning that no one could take seriously anymore. When all the evidence was collected, the Charlotte County District Attorney's Office charged Colin Griffith with first-degree murder. He was transferred to a detention facility where he awaited his trial. The investigators also began working with the Oklahoma authorities to investigate his father's death. Colin never showed any sign of remorse. He asked no questions, did not inquire about his mother, and showed no sympathy for his fate. The officers who interrogated him came to the same conclusion. They saw an emotionless, cold-blooded man who not only killed, but did so without remorse. Given the circumstances of the crime, the prosecutor's office stated that they would seek the maximum penalty for Colin, life imprisonment without the right to parole. However, the court was confronted with the question of his age. At the time of the crime, Colin was 17 years old, which could affect the proceedings. The prosecution appealed, requesting that Colin be tried as an adult. Under Florida law, such a measure is possible for minors if the offense is exceptionally cruel and poses a danger to the public. The court granted the appeal, and Colin fell under the jurisdiction of adult criminal law, which meant harsher punishment. Colin's lawyers tried to defend themselves by claiming he was mentally unstable and might have acted impulsively. However, the prosecution presented records of his conversations with psychiatrists, which showed that he was not only aware of his actions, but also that he had directly threatened his mother months before the crime. He would either kill her or himself. This fact became one of the main points of the indictment. The prosecution's office also raised questions about his past. In 2023, Colin killed his father, but the case was closed then due to lack of evidence. However, now that it has become clear that he is capable of a crime, law enforcement authorities in Oklahoma have decided to consider reopening the investigation. The investigators began searching for potential witnesses who could shed light on the events of February 2023. The investigators turned to friends and acquaintances of Charles Griffith, as well as Colin's former teachers and classmates, to find out whether he had previously expressed the intention to harm his father. The Charlotte County District Attorney's Office sent the current case file to Oklahoma, pointing to similar behavior of the accused in both cases. During the investigation, new evidence was found. In the archives of the school Colin attended, a student's statement was found who recalled that Colin had spoken shortly before his father's death about wanting to live without him, and that his death would be the best solution. At the time, no one took this seriously, but now these words were seen in a different light. The Oklahoma prosecutor stated that Charles's case could officially be reopened if further evidence was found. This would require either new witnesses or direct evidence that Colin's version of self-defense was false. Meanwhile, the trial for the manslaughter of Catherine continued. The prosecution insisted on life imprisonment without the possibility of a reduced sentence. The prosecutors emphasized that Colin had shown no remorse, expressed no regret for his actions, and had remained cool-headed since his arrest. As with the first crime, Colin showed no emotion either in the courtroom or during questioning. His behavior was the same as in 2023, when he spoke about his father's death with the same calm as he now spoke about his mother's death. This strengthened the prosecution's argument. The final verdict in the Catherine Griffith case is still pending. However, the greatest tension was whether the investigators in Oklahoma would be able to find evidence to formally charge Colin with the crime against Charles Griffith. If this were the case, Colin could receive an additional sentence and definitively eliminate the slightest chance of being released. Thank you for watching, and take care.